Welcome to the New World Order Showcase Podcast. Your host, Jill Hart, the Coach's Alchemist. Couldn't be more excited to have you join us today. On this podcast, we celebrate the champions of change, the up-and-coming life, health and transformational coaches who are fearlessly stepping forward to make a difference in the world. Get ready for inspiring stories, practical tips, and powerful moments that will motivate you to make a positive change in your life and those around you. We're happy to have you join us on this incredible journey as we dive into the world of life, health, and transformational coaches who are lighting up the path towards a better tomorrow.
Hi, and welcome to the New World Order Showcase Podcast. Today we have with us Susanne Kurz.
Almost, yes.
Kurz. I practiced, I promise you. Susanne is a cultural scientist specializing in humanities, and she's a hypnosis coach. Her mission is bringing you into deeper contact with your inner compass and accompanying you into a happier life, which allows her to contribute to making the world a better place person by person, because the more people are in tune with themselves, the more peaceful and friendly our society and the world as a whole becomes. I love that last part. Welcome to the show, Susanne.
Thank
Susanne.
you, Jill. No problem. It's such an international name. I'm used to people always using their pronunciation. No problem with that. And thank you very much for having me, Jill.
It's so great to finally get to meet you almost person to person. The wonders of the internet, because you're over in Germany right now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So world's a smaller and smaller place all the time. Susanne, and I have trouble because I have your name in my head and I've said it a certain way in my head because we've known each other for quite a while now. And I've really been looking forward to having you on the show because I wanted to talk to you about all the projects you have going on and all the things that you're doing because they're so interesting. So, and you also got me connected with Joanna Hunter, who's also been on the show. And in her $1 Million Experiment, which I love it. It's so fun because we're all about manifesting and stuff like that in my world. So anyway, tell us your story. How'd you get started and how did you marry the connection between science and the academia world into the woo-woo world of coaching and hypnosis?
That's a very interesting question because it's not really something that's very much linked. Essentially, when I decided to leave academia, I've been in academia for most of my adult life. I've worked as a researcher and university teacher in the cultural history of the Persian-speaking world, which is essentially during the times of Islam. So it's essentially the eastern and southeastern half of the Islamicate world, which many people don't know because they are so focused on the Arabs. And when I decided to leave, there were various factors that contributed to this decision. And one of the factors was that I had navigated myself into a mild burnout, and that was accompanied by some kind of writing block. And so what I needed to do was to make a cut, a really hard cut, and do something completely different. So I couldn't go into university administration or anything like that. I needed a cut. And that meant that I had to, and that was a process that took place over a couple of years. I had to find out what else I could do with my life. which would not require me to necessarily use all the skills and knowledge I had acquired over the years. Because while I was still trying to do that, I was pretty much stuck, because nothing that came up that was outside of academia was better than academia. It would have been just less money, you know.
Yeah, same amount of work or more.
Yeah, so that wasn't really what I was looking for, but I was actually looking for being self-employed somehow and doing my thing. And I'm also not very much employable, let's say. I mean, academia worked for me because there's a lot of freedoms still in the system, despite all the downsides. That's a really good thing for people like me, that you can more or less work when the best times are for you, and in your own with your own organization around it, and processes and all that, and on topics that interest you more or less. So yeah, that didn't work, so I had to find something else. And I had been pointed by colleagues to, well, let's say the idea that I might be good at working with people, because whenever there was a problematic discussion to be had with, you know, the student helpers in our projects and things like that, I was the person who was going to have to talk with them. And yeah, even one of my former colleagues, I think, said something like mediation would be a good kind of job for me. So I thought, okay, maybe there's something to that. And then I just did, you know, the exercises you do, like finding out what you can do. And one of the exercises is, what is something that you are already doing without getting paid for it, and you could do it more and it wouldn't feel like work. And talking to people and trying to help them solve their problems was high on the list, let's say. And then I got the idea to become a coach, and I know it's a business model that works for a lot of people. So I thought, okay, you can theoretically make that work. And then I got an education. And that was not a university education, because it would have taken too long and cost too much and all that. I didn't have that time and money available. It was more a practical education, which is it's a different path that is available here. And yeah, wanted to become a coach. And so I learned a couple of things about psychology and how to lead a conversation in a context where you want to use questions on all that to help someone and to find out what their issue is and all that. And I also did an education on a training in hypnosis. And that's because I found that this is something that has always fascinated me. And this is something that, looking back, well, dates back to my teens, when I first learned about all sorts of stuff that you can, human consciousness, essentially, which is something that has always fascinated me. And there we approach the point where things connect. I mean, I think it's also a very powerful tool. And I always loved trance states, which I didn't know until I learned what a trance state really is. And then I thought, oh, yeah, okay, then it clicked. That I'm just someone who likes to be in trance states herself. So it was very, yeah, obvious.
When did you discover trance states? How old were you?
I think as a baby, because, you know, I get into a trance state when I'm in a car, especially when I'm sitting in the car and I'm not the driver. I mean, I also go into a light trance when I'm driving, but it's a different kind of trance. So not that anyone thinks I I can't react or anything.
No, I know what you mean.
I actually, if you're driving a lot, you probably know what I mean. And it's a slightly different state, but it's also a trance state. It's a bit deeper when I'm not driving, but I'm sitting in a car. And my parents told me that when they drove me home from the hospital as a baby, I think they said I stopped crying when we had something like 50 kilometers per hour, and when it got too slow or they had to stop, and I started crying again. So probably
that's interesting.
Probably I discovered that I like trance states as a baby. But yeah, I think it was in my teens that I experimented with things like well, in Germany we call it. I don't think you don't actually have that in English. We call it autogenous training because it's a German who came up with that. That's kind of a self-hypnosis system for self-hypnosis, which is you hypnotize yourself to feel your hands and arms getting heavy and getting warm, and then the legs getting heavy and getting warm, and then there are several stages to that, and that's essentially self-hypnosis, but it's a kind of a system developed how to do that step by step, and that's very well known here, and that's something I started testing and playing around with in my teens when I think my mother and my grandmother did a course in that, and that was the time when I started when I was 12 or 13 or something like that. And then I started to read things, and well, what I have is a very insatiable thirst for knowledge and learning and figuring out stuff and finding out how the world works and all that. And I think that's where we get to the woo-woo, because I'm not the type of person who likes to completely exclude things just because others say that's not real. If it's interesting and fascinating and could be a great thing if it works and all that sort of stuff, that's more. It's more my kind of approach. Is more if it's interesting and it could be something good. Then let's check it out and let's read about it and let's see and let's evaluate yourself. And that's maybe a difference because I do appreciate if things have something like scientific studies to back it up and to tell you, yes, this is something that we have tested and it's proven that it works and all that. I really appreciate if we have that, but it's not necessarily a foundation for me or a prerequisite for me to test something. I like to build my own opinion, and I like to use my own brain, and I don't necessarily need something like a consensus to allow me, to permit me to explore something. So that's the personality trait. I think that is a link. So that's a link between, for me personally, between academia and the woo world, is that I'm interested in learning new things, in exploring fascinating topics and also techniques, obviously. I like experimenting myself with my own consciousness and my faculties and all that. And that's something I've always had. I've had that as a teenager. As I said, I tried to test or started to test and try stuff. And the other thing where the connection is, I think, is, and that's more between the coaching and academia, is my interest in people. I have a really huge interest in people and their stories. And that's an interest you can follow in various professions, fields, and on various paths. And one for me was to study the history of people in another culture, in other regions, different from mine, because it's more fascinating and more interesting, and just more excitement for me if it's not too close to what I live in everyday life. I mean, there are a lot of people, I think, who just think if it's not directly involved in my life, it's not relevant to me, or it's not interesting. But for me, it's pretty much the opposite. If it's farther away, it gets more fascinating and more interesting, because it's not so easy to relate to and to understand. And I think that's a really important thing in our globalized world when it comes to cultures, also religions and all that, that we are aware that our ways, as a country, as a culture, culture is also a concept that is very hard to delineate, but we won't go into that. I think
it's only hard because not a lot of people actually experience living in other cultures. But once you've lived in another culture, it's easier to understand. And when you're in Europe, you have so many cultures that are so close together. I think it's more of an American problem than anything else, because Americans seem to think the whole world is just like it is here, but it's not. There are things that we just take for granted that other people, they express it differently. And it's easy to offend people in other countries if you don't understand their cultural differences. Without even needing to.
I mean, that's on the practical side. I think that's really interesting to think about how that is for Americans, because obviously you have such a huge country with different states that you can travel a lot without ever leaving the United States. So you may have variations and differences there, but they may not be as huge as if you, for example, travel from Germany to the Middle East, which may, from the distance, may be a similar distance as when you traverse several states, but it's a completely different culture and way of thinking, although we have a lot in common because of some common roots. But it's in everyday life, it's just a completely different experience. So you can travel a lot without having this sort of experiences of strong differences. I mean, in Europe, cultures are, in, let's say, Middle and Northern Europe, cultures are different to a certain degree, but there's also so much similarities that I think it's not that much different. You have different languages, obviously, which comes with a slightly different way of thinking. That's correct. That's right. So that's probably the biggest difference. If you go to Southern Europe, it's more the Mediterranean. Then the differences can be more apparent, because we go then into another sphere of culture. But what I mean by that is also you have these overlaps, and it's not sharp cuts between cultures. It's more like these differences that build up as you move farther and farther from a certain point of origin. But there's never a point where you can say, oh, here is the point where this culture is the end of this culture, the start of that culture. That's it's not that easy or that simple. Let's say it's not that simple. And then within a national culture, you also have all the other cultures, like your different identities. It's kind of like circles, like concentric circles that get wider and wider. But in any case, what I think is really important in a globalized world, and that may actually be something where Americans have a bit of a disadvantage because of this situation, is that we acknowledge that our ways are not the only ways, and also not the only legitimate ways, and not the only rational ways, and not the only ways that have a logic to themselves. And that's why I think it's important to venture outside of your own, your own bubble, so to speak, and and to learn and understand it, and to have people who do that by profession, as I used to do, who dive deeper into that and try to unravel those inner dynamics and logic of the cultures in a way that then is, because we are coming from a different culture ourselves, is then easier to communicate to people from our culture. Because obviously in other cultures there are people who are exploring their own culture too, obviously, but that doesn't mean that they will be very efficient in communicating that to people of other cultures. Some can, some maybe not so much. So I think this widening of our own horizons is a very important thing, and that's another important core element of me, of who I am and of what I'm all about, is this transcending of limitations, so to speak. And that's also a parallel that you have when you go into the coaching world and also the woo world, where it's all about breaking down these limits we are used to, and expanding and exploring beyond that. And so that's what's important in it for me. But I also think for a globalized world, it's really important to accept and respect other cultures, even when you don't necessarily agree with all the things that are in them, and personally don't want to live that. You don't have to.
It's okay. You don't have to. You can just accepting what is, allowing people to be who they were intended to be, because we're all different aspects of the same source energy. And in the expression, if you give people the freedom to express themselves in the way that is natural for them, instead of trying to push them into the box that we've all been trained to, like, you must do this, and then you must do this, and this is how you need to live your life, and these are the steps that you have to take. It feels like we're breaking out of that. And it's from conversations like this, honestly, that people are beginning to see that there's opportunities for everyone to express themselves, but we need to allow each other to, and appreciate each other's differences, and allow those differences to exist, because it makes the whole world richer.
Yes, exactly. And this enrichment, and also finding, other ways of thinking and feeling, and also functioning, other ways of also giving your world meaning, interpreting the world. That's also something that then brings me to why I'm also very much into history. So I'm not only going to mentally, so to speak, to another culture. So I'm not moving only into space. I'm also moving in time, because it's even more interesting when we go to the Middle Ages, where people were thinking differently and feeling differently and functioning differently and interpreting the world differently. It's just, this fascination with the human potential and the variety of humanity, and what it means to be a human being, and to live in this world, and to try to make sense of everything. And I think it's really important, and it's easier to to understand, to accept, and to respect, and then to be able also to have relationships and do business and whatever with people from somewhere else. If you have started to or try to understand how that works, and have not just been exposed, to the very worst things a culture or a country has to offer, which may have been exported to the rest of the world in some way, and think that's all what is about that. And these people are either have adapted themselves to us, the West, or they are dead. And we don't want that.
Yeah,
That's I think that's a tendency if you don't know a lot about it. And so I think it's really important, this widening of perspectives, to have a more peaceful world and to live together in a more peaceful way. And we won't be able to do that if we try to just always look from our personal point of view and perspective and think everyone else should behave according to what we think is right and is best.
The black and white, good or bad. There aren't good or bad people.
Yeah,
there are just people. We're all different aspects of the same energy.
Yeah, that's exactly my point. We are all humans, so that means we are able to somehow relate and understand. So that's a basis. And then we have all these differences that are to explore and to understand them is helpful, to then be able to see that exactly that we don't have black or white. We don't have good or evil. We have people. We just have people. And essentially, what every person wants is to be happy, safe and happy. I think that's essentially, and obviously you won't always be on top of the world and singing with happiness, but to get to a point where the majority of people is content is certainly a thing that safe and content. That would certainly be a good goal if we want to have a world where we don't have wars and crime and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There will probably be some people who have some sort of actual damage, brain damage, or really huge mental health issues that may be disruptive. But I think if that is a really small amount of people, we will be able to deal with that. And but I think we need a huge majority of people to feel safe and to feel content. And there are two, in my opinion, there are two aspects to that. One is material, and one is emotional and mental and so on. It's more psychological. And as I don't have the resources to shower the world with enough with enough money and stuff to give everyone material safety, at least what I can do when I do the coaching is to help this individual that has come to me to be happier in their life and more content in their life. And also I've learned that obviously people who don't have the same sort of material issues that I would say the majority of people in the world has, that they aren't necessarily happy and content. So that means there is another element that needs to be addressed there. So it's useful to do that. But yeah, so in very broad strokes, that's the vision I have, is that we need to get to the point where we have more collaboration, cooperation, and tolerance, and respect and acceptance, and that is something you get easiest when people aren't in survival mode, let's say, and that's also the thing we have in Germany at the moment on a political level, with the Green Party pushing through a lot of things, which essentially may be good for the climate. There are also disputes about how much it helps, really, but may be good for the climate and against the climate change and all that, which is certainly an important thing to tend to. But at the same time, you won't be able to do a lot on that level if you have people who are still, in survival mode and either really struggling to just keep what they have, or at least being concerned about that a lot in their minds. And so I think it's really a basis to create that sort of, and that's a problem, I think, because people are saying we need to do a lot of things very quickly about the climate change, but the basis to make that work is to rebuild or reform our societies in a way that people can actually tolerate that. Because that's something I learned, when I was doing historical research, and I obviously we have I was working on the Islamicate cultures, or the culture or cultures that are influenced by the religion of Islam. And obviously you come across the situation that in the Middle Ages, Islamic societies often were more tolerant than Christian ones. So at the same time, and on the other hand, today they are not really prominently, famous for being the most tolerant cultures. And what I learned through history and historical research there is that it has to do with how the situation was. So they were usually most tolerant when they were safely in power and not threatened. And if you think about it, that's actually something that also works on the individual psychology level. If you feel threatened in your own existence, or
Your level of standard of living.
Yeah, the standard of living, which is, let's say, a reasonable standard of living. We are not talking about someone who has several villas and pools and whatever. Let's say just middle class, a comfortable standard of living, middle class Western society. And when people feel threatened in that, then that's a fertile ground for being
revolution.
Well, also at some point it may come to that, but also for for hatred against strangers or foreigners immigrants who come in and use up resources. So then people get the impression that there isn't enough for us already, and then we have to give more to others. So you get this sort of problem. Then there's not much love for spending a lot of money on things that are good for the climate, but you actually can't afford them, but you're going to be forced to do it, and if you don't do it, then you will just
punished.
Have to. Yeah, your own option may be to, for example, sell your house or something because you just can't afford it. Things like that. That's something that stands in the way of an open, friendly, kind, and progressive society that cares for not only immigrants but also the planet and all that. It's essentially what Joanna also says in her teachings. If your cup is filled, then you can go on and look for how do we save the world and the rest of the people and all that. If you are concerned with, okay, how do I make it to tomorrow or to the next month or to next year or even to what's going to happen in the next 10 years when I'm probably still be alive, and do I lose everything or do I lose this or do I lose that, and you get in this survival mode, then obviously you are not very open to prioritizing the greater good. So I think that's really something we have to kind of find a solution for. And but we are way past your question, I think, which was about how to go from how to connect academia with the woo. And I think there is not really a direct connection, but the thing was that I was increasingly reading about well, let's say I had an existential crisis, as you sometimes have in the middle of your life. And for me, the middle of my life was somewhere in my 30s. And not that I think it's the middle, I have huge plans to get very old, but something like an early onset of a midlife crisis, let's say, for certain reasons, which had to do with personal life, which had to do with not work conditions, but the system, how the system worked, and didn't really offer great perspectives, let's say, and especially not long-term perspectives. Which would have been helpful for having a family, for example. So that all feeds into each other. And during that time, I then fell back to things that I had pushed aside before. I had been interested in my teens and in my early 20s, and then had pushed aside because I felt I didn't come to a solution for myself, and it made me miserable. And it kept me from enjoying life. And so I thought, okay, you have your lovely subject of studies, which you love, and you have this and you have that, and the world is a nice place. So just focus on that for a while. And I did that into my early 30s, early to mid 30s. And then it resurfaced when I had this crisis. And because for me, it was always important to find kind of meaning in life. I mean, there are people who say it's the wrong question to ask for meaning. You should just experience it and all that. And it's all true on a certain level. But for me, it was important to have some sort of meaning, because otherwise it's like if everything is pointless to a certain degree. Yes, it might be enjoyable, but if something is not enjoyable, then, and that's also pointless, then what's the point in suffering through this? And so I'm the sort of person who needs meaning. So and for me it looked like this: if this is our only life, and with death we vanish into nothingness, then there's no meaning and there's no point. And so I had worked on that and thought about that and explored things in my teens and early 20s already. And then, as I said, not found a solution. I had started to look at near-death experiences and things, but I think I just wasn't ready to fully embrace the possibility of it, let's say. And it's also very complex and hard to wrap your head around in a positive manner sometimes, especially when things like karma and rebirth and things like that, reincarnation come into the equation. And I also didn't really want to look at the option of reincarnation, because I always thought that I was pretty lucky in this life. And so
what's the next life going to bring?
Yeah, obviously you could it's not like you're expecting to get much better, but it's very likely to get worse, and so you're not really interested in reincarnation. But after I pushed it aside, it wasn't solved for me. So that means, okay, I was distracted for a while, and I did enjoy what I did and all that. But at some point in my 30s, I came back to the question, what is this all about, and what's the meaning of it, and what's the point? And is it really, this materialistic, that's a really hard word in English for me to pronounce, materialistic paradigm that we are living in, which is propagated by the sciences essentially, and also adopted by the humanities, because that's just what intelligent, educated people have to believe these days. Well, if that's true, that's just really devastating, and I hope that's not true. So let's go again and have a look again and see if we can find some sort of proof that that's not true, or something that at least casts a reasonable doubt on it. And so that's what I did. I started reading again, and there were new books that had come out, and I have actually a YouTube series on the topic now. It's I do it in German and in English. So usually I have 2 videos. One, I record a video in German, and then I record the same video in English, and it's pretty much the same content. Sometimes there are slight variations, but because I don't script it. If I scripted it, I could as well write a blog and not do a video, so I don't script it. I just think about what do I and reread and think about what do I want to convey and what's the content, and then I start talking. And I would rather do 10 retakes than script it. So I mean, it's maybe idiotic because it's probably more time consuming this way, but it feels easier for me. So I do it that way. There I discussed that I also have in the first episode or 2 episodes I've talked about my story and how I came to do that, and I'm kind of retracing my steps from back in 2011, 2012 when I restarted reading, and I started reading about near-death experiences again. I started reading about I read some books for dummies about, physics and the brain and all that, to see if there's anything that science has to say that really disproves the clues you can get from near-death experiences. Because obviously it's not like hard proof. It's not something that you can dissect or redo in a laboratory. And
I wonder if like the remote viewing wouldn't lend some information to you around that, because remote viewing is used by governments even.
Yeah, I mean, that's also interesting that there is, behind the doors and the curtains, there may be things going on, while the rest of the world is thinking, well, we are all just our bodies and our brains, and that's it. But yeah, there are a couple of things that I don't really understand why it's not explored further, because there was the AWARE study about out-of-body experiences, which was conducted in various hospitals around the world, where they projected symbols at the ceiling generated by a computer and in a completely random pattern, so nobody really could know what was projected there at any given point in time. And then they hoped that when they brought in patients that had a heart attack or something, and the heart stopped beating, which is one of the most frequent cases when people then have a near-death experience, that then some of them would have an out-of-body experience and go up to the ceiling, because that's often how it's described, and look down and see the projector and see what is projected there, and then afterwards they could ask them about it and then check in the computer what does it match, and that would have been a really nice proof of that being actually a thing, and not just something that works in the brain. But
seen the experiments that people have done where they're blindfolded, but they can still see outside, like they can read stuff and they can describe things? They're fully conscious, they're just blindfolded.
Yeah, I don't know about scientific studies. I would have to check that. I have read a lot about that. There are also courses where you can train that. But I really don't know about studies about that. But would be interesting to add that to my program. But what came out of this? I mean, the problem with this AWARE study was that there were practical problems. Most of the people who had out-of-body experiences weren't in the rooms with the projectors, and those who were there. That I think it came down to 2 people that they could actually interview, who were in such rooms, but they didn't have experiences that gave any input about the projectors and what had been projected there. But there was one case where they, because of the protocols they had from the surgery they performed, where the person described in a very detailed way what had happened in the room, and they could check with the protocol of the surgery. And that was also during a time span where you actually, because there seems to be a time span where there is actually increased activity in the brain at a point when prior to, you know, these modern days, you couldn't even measure that, and you couldn't expect that. But that's in a certain time frame after the heart stops. I think I would have to look up the details. I have it in my videos because I looked it up for the video. But this was a time span that went over this time span of increased brain activity. So that can't explain that. And it was correct, and it's not completely foolproof, but because it's in the same room, so there could still be some sort of perception that we just can't measure these days. But it's really according to what we know today, you know, it can't be explained if consciousness is produced by the brain. So that's one case that's really interesting. But there are also things, you know, I've just had a video with some cases from a book of a biologist, a German biologist, who wrote this book in, I don't know, 2012 or 2015 or something. And he collected cases, some very old from the literature from 18th, 19th century, some also that had been reported to him, so from our century. And that were cases of people whose brains were actually damaged. And so it's really clear, because there was either an autopsy or one of the cases, I picked out 4 cases that were especially stunning, I think. And the modern case was they did scans and all that, so they knew the situation of the brain. And these people had something that's called terminal mental clarity. So shortly before their death, or sometimes as long as 3 weeks before, but mostly shortly before their death, they had moments where they came back to complete mental clarity and could communicate and remember everything, and could also remember, and because they talked about it, things that had happened before when they had not been in a conscious state or able to communicate, or when essentially everyone thought they wouldn't even notice what happened. You know, so it's quite interesting. But that's the path I went to check on my you know, rational level, what do we know and what do we not know, and is there some sort of evidence that we are more than our, you know, our physical bodies. And none of that, as I said, none of that is, and obviously the question for me would be, if there are people who can astral travel at will, then why would you do studies like that, where you have so much randomness in it, that it's a lot of expenses, but you can't really gain good results, when you as well could just put someone who can do that into a room and do the same thing and monitor them and then check back, I don't know, maybe that has been done and hasn't worked, I don't know, but in any case,
Money.
it's not
Money is the answer to that question.
Yeah, well, obviously you don't get funding for things that are outside the paradigm. Yeah, that's the other problem.
And you do get money from the government if you have some system for helping them spy on other countries, which is what they use remote viewing for.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
So it's the black
but-
op sort of thing.
Yeah, but essentially, what I mean to say is we don't have, in what I have seen, we don't have, foolproof, scientific evidence, but we have enough evidence for me to say, okay, also the number of people who had this kind of there's more, obviously there's the near-death experiences, there's this sort of stuff with damaged brain and mental clarity, and there are other things in this area. It's a whole host of things, and it's so much that I don't think it's plausible, and here we are in the humanities. I don't think it's plausible to assume that all of that is based on people being delusional or liars.
Oh, yeah.
Or mixing something up in their memories. I mean, memory is a very complicated thing. One has to be really, cautious about that, because the way memory works, it's really human memory. When it comes to details, it's details and exact timing and all that, it's really unreliable. But I think for myself, there was enough evidence to say, okay, I think I can safely assume that there is probably more to us than just being completely produced by our bodies. I mean, our consciousness being produced only by brain and body and all that. So once I made this conclusion, I had a really that was beautiful, because I went out and I looked at the sky and I looked at the trees and everything, and I thought, hey, life is beautiful, the world is beautiful, it's so wonderful. I felt really happy. I was so relieved and so happy. And sometimes you really only realize how heavy something has weighed on you when the weight is taken off. And that was a real game changer for me, when I was at the point where I thought, okay, so it looks like, and that's the other thing, I also looked into the materialistic paradigm, and is this proven? And it isn't proven. That's the other thing. You can't really prove it, because at least not at the moment. I don't know, maybe there's someone going to come up with something that I can't imagine, but you can't measure the content of consciousness. That's the thing. You can measure brain activity, and then you have a correlation to something people experience and can report. So you have the experience and you have the brain activity, and that correlates, because it's at the same time, if it is at the same time, which comes down to those, very small amounts of time, sometimes fractions of seconds and so. But that's what you have. And a correlation is not a causal link. It's a correlation. It's just there at the same time. And then the cause and effect thing, there are other models and other options how that could work. So it's not proven, let's say. That's my result of my personal amateur research into science, was this is not proven. And there are things that can't be explained by this inside this paradigm. And if that's the case, then there must be more to explore, which currently isn't being explored because of reasons we know, and system and all of that. So that was essentially the point where I said, okay, so that means we have one unproven belief that is very widespread and upheld by people, and they have some evidence that suggests it could be correct, but it's not a proof. And then we have another option, which is also not proven, with hard scientific facts, but it's essentially they both have the same claim to, being correct, because both aren't proven. So it means I can believe this or that. I can choose. And if I can choose, why would I choose the thing that makes me miserable? So that was the point where I, for myself, and I'm not suggesting anyone should necessarily do that if they are happy with evaporating into nothingness when they die. Then obviously no problem with that. But if you don't feel happy with that, if you feel miserable about that, if it spoils your joy, if it makes you think life has no point, and it's all, you get desperate about it and all that, then why believe that if you can all as well believe the other thing? So essentially that's kind of how I would say there's no direct connection between academia and well, let's say the woo realm, but there is kind of an approach that I, as an academic with an inquisitive mind and all that, the kind of thought processes that cast doubt on things that I may find nice, but may have other explanations, and I totally acknowledge and know my bias in that, but I also have because that's what we are trained to do as academics. We know our bias. I know that my bias always was that I wanted the materialistic paradigm not to be true, because it made me miserable. But
there's a whole world full of people that choose religions.
But I had I found an approach that worked for me. That is, in a way, it's not strictly academic, but it has elements of how I do academic work, and so it was enough for me to personally come to the conclusion I can as well believe that there's a part of me, some form of my consciousness that lives on. And once you cross over to this point, then it gets really interesting, because I think there are there's a lot of bullshit out there, which calls itself spiritual or whatever, and some is very interesting and great for people who have a mind like me, who like fantasy and all that, because you can have all these worlds and things and ideas and so on. But there's also a lot of stuff that is that I can relate to and I can connect with, on the basis that I think there's a background reality that is not usually perceived by our five senses, unless we are psychics, and I'm not, definitely not. And I think, the reason I started a YouTube series on that is that I think there may be more people like me who are miserable and unhappy in the materialistic paradigm, but have been brought up in it and think it may be true, and don't have personal experiences that show them another option. Because obviously, if you can see dead people or something like that, like Joanna tells us about her childhood, when she thought everyone can see them and all that, and then learned that apparently that's not the case.
Most people can't.
Yeah, that most people can't. But if you can, obviously, if you can see dead people and say, "Oh, your grandmother gave me this recipe," and the other person says, "How? My grandmother has been dead for 10 years or something." Obviously, in that case, you have an advantage. You will see the world differently. But if you don't have that, and you're surrounded by people who don't have that, and then very authoritative sources like science tell you that's not possible, but you feel miserable about it, then you are really caught in a bad situation. And I worked my way out of that. And in working my way out of that, it was really important to come across people who had a similar background, had a similar starting point as me, and got to a different, convinced by a different worldview, because they encountered some things or had experiences or came to conclusions. And I essentially started the YouTube series because of that, because I thought maybe I can be, not in the same way, because those often were scientists and people who did about certain did real tests about certain things and studies and all that, and try to really got about it scientifically, which I just can't do because I don't have this equipment for it. But maybe I can be with my reasoning, just simply with my reasoning and the information I have gathered, and I'm explaining, and I tell them what I think about it and why I think about it this way. Maybe I can be someone like that for someone who is searching and is a seeker and is miserable and wants to find a way. And if it's only that they go and read the books that I mentioned and go on from there, or find their own their own resources about it that are sufficient for them or helpful for them. So that's essentially, so everything somehow connects always, but I really think there's currently no bridge between let's say normal academia, the majority of academia, and the woo. And the woo is actually also, it's obviously it's obvious there are a couple of logical problems and things surrounding that, and I think it's really interesting to look at things and to check where do we have bullshit and where do we have things that are just phrased in a way that may look like bullshit, but it's just a way of express something that relates to the background reality that, in my opinion, obviously is there. So and then you can just check what is useful for yourself. Like I mean, that's actually a pragmatic approach to beliefs. What is useful for me to believe, what is helpful and what is detrimental. And if for example, if you have something like the law of attraction, and you're listening to someone like Abraham channeled by Esther Hicks, and it boils down to make an effort to be as happy as you can every day, or to feel as good, or let's say to feel as good as you can every day, then things might happen. Then you have a win-win situation, because it's also something that Joanna says in one of her anecdotes, what she did in her journey. But I think that's a win-win situation, because there are only two possibilities. Either I feel better and I get what I want, or I feel better and I don't get what I want, but I still feel better.
But you still feel better.
Exactly. So why not try that? So and yeah,
I think this works on a lot of different levels. Having deconverted from Christianity, I can see people that are trapped in religious paradigms that are like, there's not serving them. It's clearly not serving them to believe the things that they're believing, because it's making them miserable. They're feeling like hopeless, even though it's supposed to give you hope. It can actually leave you feeling hopeless and useless, and not that you'll never measure up and you'll never be good enough. And to go on this journey similar to the one that you went on, though you're looking at a materialism versus a spiritual acceptance of the way reality exists, coming out of different religious confines might be, it might help people to explore those options too, and see what makes them feel better in the present.
Yeah, and actually, I would just encourage people. I mean, not to don't let your life fall apart because you're just lying down and trying to meditate the whole day. That's not what
Yeah.
I would advise if you can't afford it. I mean, if you have a bit of a bolster, a financial bolster, you can test that for a while. But but I would always say just test things on yourself. That's really something I've always been doing. I will always be doing, and that's and obviously you then assume when something works for you that there will be other people, not necessarily everyone, but there will be other people it works for too, because you're not that special.
There's a lot of us.
Yeah. I always think personal experience often overrules. It doesn't replace, scientific results or anything, because if you want to lift something on a very general level, you need that. But for yourself, your personal experience will always override scientific results. And if you wait for science to really explore things they currently can't explain in a way that maybe at some point they can, but for that they first need to acknowledge they exist and are worth exploring. And if you want to wait for that, it may be well after your lifetime. So I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Personally, I wouldn't do that. I would just go ahead and test things for myself. And yes, you have a lot trial and error, and you may have failures on the way and all that. But yeah, it's not for everyone. I think someone like me, it doesn't. I don't mind. I don't mind if something doesn't work for me, and I have had the when I tested it, I have just have had the experience that sometimes a couple of years later it may work. So it's sometimes worth to try again when you are in a different place, because we change. We don't remain the same all of the time, especially in the years between, let's say, 15 and 40, or even 25 and 35, and 30
changing.
and 40, and we are always
40
changing.
and
But
50 and 50 and 60.
there are certain time frames where I think it's especially strong. So up to 25, it's especially strong, fast-paced. Let's say fast-paced. It may slow down then, but yeah, I don't really mind, because I like trying and testing and exploring. So maybe some people don't like that as much, then yeah, and rather want to follow something someone else has really strongly, explored and tested and whatever. But yeah, don't know. I do my own thing, and it's really, I think I couldn't have gotten as far in my personal development and exploring these kind of things if I had stayed in academia, because you are surrounded by people who will think you're a little bit dumb, maybe, or insane or whatever, something that's totally detrimental to your image if you want to get more jobs, if you go about it and talk about it. So
I get that.
I think that's really hard when you are in that environment to
So Susanne,
yeah.
Susanna, how do people get in touch with you if they want to explore more about this or just work with you?
Yeah, okay. So the one thing is, this topic specifically we have talked about is on my YouTube, and it's still ongoing. And so they can check out my YouTube channel, where you also find my Facebook page, my where I also have coaching offers. I do a main offer, which is my main hypnosis offer, is a trance journey to the power within. This is something that's not even in the woo area, because hypnosis has been researched a bit. It's more it's about connecting with your inner world and your inner resources and your inner wisdom. So you just for a while get rid of your rational mind that is talking all of the time and keeping you distracted and distracting you from things you may want or need, and deep inside know, but it can't tolerate that for whatever reasons. I had that for a long time, like when I had a pretty good intuition for huge life decisions for a long time, and then I buried that under a great amount of survival mode fear. And at some point I realized that I had lost touch with that, because I didn't know where to go and what to do and all that. And I found that I have to dig that up again. And I found that a hypnotic trance state is really helpful for that. So if you are in that situation, that's something I can offer. But there are other offers also, and you find them on the Facebook page in German and in English. It's a very short description for each service, but they are because there's a character limit, but you get an overview. I also have a website which is mainly German at the moment. I'm trying to get it translated into English and set up by the end of the month, because I have a promotion come out in English. But let's see. Yeah, there's also email address, and you also can find me on LinkedIn. And obviously my personal Facebook profile. I'll send you all the links for the show notes.
We'll make sure they all get in the show notes.
Exactly. And obviously the thing that connects all my we haven't mentioned my new
your
media
new project
branch of the
I think we're
business
gonna have to
and
have
my
you come
project.
back and talk about that. So
let's just have a short mention of that, because I also have the media branch of the business, where I'm offering, entering podcasts and other shows, YouTube shows, also independent TV talk shows on OTT and all that, on IMDb, which is the International Movie Database, which has opened up to podcasts too. It's becoming the biggest central database for all things media, international database, and it's really helpful for credibility, authority, quality backlinks, and also makes the show more interesting for people who already have a profile up there or want a profile up there, because they can get a credit. And a couple of other things. I'm trying to build actually a conscious show network on there, because the more conscious shows are on there, or spiritual shows, or however you will call them, the more interconnections will be there, and the more visibility will be for each of them, will come with that. And I also do a little bit of, video editing, repurposing of audio for podcasts, YouTube service, and things like that, for coaches and healers who don't like the tech stuff. And what kind of pulls it all together is my fantasy TV series in development. And there you have, the vision for the world, which is obviously played out here in a fantasy world, in a fictional world, which has the upside that we can have things as facts in this world that are not easily seen as facts in our world, or don't exist in this form in our world, and we don't have to prove anything. We can just work with that. And so there is a there is essentially a lot of my knowledge, skills, experience from academia in the world building and all that. It is a story where, well, very briefly said, the Mad King of a magician realm wages a new war on the adjacent merchant kingdom. And that forces the regent minister, the aging regent minister of the merchant kingdom, back to his magician roots. And he doesn't really know yet, but he gets pushed to his limits on this journey, and has to take center stage at, well, the dawn of a new era, which goes beyond Clash of Civilizations. And so so we have an adventure story. There's magic in it. There's war in it. There is cultural conflict in it. Personal conflict. There's family, a lot of family. We have a main character who is in his 50s. We also have a main female character who is in her 40s, mid to end 40s. So also a bit more mature, but we also have a younger generation, and we have underlying themes like overcoming Clash of Civilizations and midlife, and also midlife crisis as a portal to new avenues. We have something for, I think, for people of all ages, but the main focus obviously is on an audience 35 plus. People who like period and fantasy, so historical drama and fantasy, and something like on the overlap. There is an overlap between shows like, for example, Vikings and Game of Thrones. One is historical and one is fantasy, but this is there's a huge overlap in the fandom, so that's essentially a target audience. Not necessarily the only one, but what I have in mind for that. And we have a really great actor for our main character, who has meanwhile been attached officially and announced. He's Ivan Kay. He's a British actor who actually should be known by more people. But all those people who have seen the series Vikings will know him as King Aile of Northumbria. And he's awesome, very versatile, goes very deep emotional impact and all that, gives depth to all sorts of characters, even if they are not very well written. And I can't wait to see what he's going to do with the character. And I will do as much as I can to have him play through his whole range. And for the female lead, I'm looking at an actress I really like, who is also rather established, and we are in talks, but nothing to share yet. Yeah, and there's a lot more to say about that, but essentially we have various levels on that. It's something for people who just want entertainment, as well as people who want to be inspired. It's essentially that the thing that I want to see on screen, something I thought, now let's do it ourselves. I have a director who is very good at making a lot happen with little funding. Mm-hmm. Because we are an independent project, obviously, that's currently money is an important thing, and we have to work with as efficiently as possible. And yeah, if anyone is interested in that, we have an Instagram account for the series, which is called Magician's Blood. The Instagram account is named Magician's Blood Series. And we have a Facebook page also, Magician's Blood Series. And I would love people to follow and interact. And if you want to, be a patron or a sponsor or anything, just let me know and we'll talk about that. And also, if you want to be maybe an ambassador or know someone who can help us, let me know about that. Yeah, and meanwhile, I'm going to work on getting in as much income as possible from the business this year, and then hopefully I can pour more into the project, because that's obviously my big passion project, where all the worlds, the media thing and the creativity thing comes in. I'm mainly writing, but I also love, picture editing, video editing, and all that sort of things.
So
that comes in, my academic experience comes in, my hypnosis training and life coaching comes in, my spiritual journey and development comes in, my vision for how a brighter world should look comes in, and there are a lot of more topics in this and all that. So that's just the main delineations.
So thank you so much for sharing all of this. What's the one thing that you hope the audience takes away from our conversation today?
Well, I hope that they feel encouraged if they are currently stuck in the materialistic paradigm, but don't feel happy with that, to keep going. Especially, as I haven't mentioned that, but I also not yet on my YouTube, but will do. I found that you can have experiences at some point, even if you don't have them from birth. Just keep going. That's the one thing I hope they take away from it, and I hope I have made them curious about all the things I have to offer, and that I will see some of them in my world.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another empowering episode of the You World Order Showcase podcast. We hope you've enjoyed hearing from our incredible life, health, and transformational coaches who are making a profound impact on the world. Remember, change begins with you, and you have the power to transform your life and the lives of others. If you want to take that next step and unlock your true potential, visit thecoachesalchemist.com, where you can find the 3 ways we can help you for free to spin your talent into gold with clarity, a system, and a plan. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an inspiring episode. And if you enjoyed today's show, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us reach more people with our positive message. Stay connected with us on social media for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and upcoming guest announcements. You can find us on Facebook at the You World Order, or simply visit thecoachesalchemist.com.